The good thing is that this lecture actually really follows up most of what everybody was talking about today. It correlates to chapter 9 in the book that I'm using for the class. It's called Land Management Issues. And so just to kind of, we'll go through this. Now, local land use planning really revolves around the concept of the right of private property ownership. Private property ownership is kind of defined as the freedom to do as one pleases with one property. And it's often considered sacrosanct in American politics. And you have the right to do what you want with your property. So consequently, the idea of planning or land use control isn't well received by a large number of individual property owners. People don't like being told what they can and cannot do with their property. They often feel that it's infringing upon their private property rights. A good number of cities grew without, however, the problem with this was that a number of cities grew without appropriate land use plans in place. And because of this, you've seen a lot of problems take place within these cities. So in response to these social problems and economic problems, many local governments have now adopted what's known as comprehensive plans that are designed to provide a blueprint for land use and development in future years. These plans are then reinforced through subdivision regulations and zoning ordinances, which identify current land usage and future uses. Now, comprehensive plans are probably the most important functions of local governments. They're mostly performed at the local level, though some are done at the state and regional level. And these plans are revised every 5 to 10 years, assuring that cities are moving in the most suitable direction. More important than these revisions, however, are the issues of what's called variances. A variance, for those of you that are familiar with them, are exceptions to zoning guidelines that are prescribed in comprehensive plans. Now, again, most instances, land use planning is performed at the local level. However, in some cases, it can be done at the regional or state level. For example, Florida has state and regional boards that review development of regional impact. So they look at things not just from county to county or city to city, but also region-wide, and you see this in certain states. City of Victorville has a general plan. Their general plan looks something like this. Here's their land use map, and I'm going to show you briefly the colors. But if you look here, this kind of peachy color here at the top, it's called very low density residential, or the expectation is about two structure density, or excuse me, 2 living people per acre. Low density residential is often around 5 people per acre. Medium density residential, which is located right here, the little brown, is 8 people per acre. And then high density residential is 15 to 20 people per acre. That's usually, what do you think high density means?
Multi-family.
Apartments, right? Apartments. What do you think low density means?
Rural.
If your height looks like it's stick you right in the eye.
It probably will. Appreciate that. What do you think low density means? Ranch rural, that's right. And so you see that the city of Victorville is zoned in particular ways. There's also mixed density residential, office professional, commercial, light industrial, heavy industrial, public institutional spaces for like BBC, open space, specific plans, and mixed use. And you notice this purple area up here, if I'm not mistaken, is going to be considered open space right here. All right? Now, interestingly enough, you notice that if you've been reading in the news, what is the city of Victorville trying to do? No. What are they trying to do? Change their what? Zoning? Density plan. And they're trying to say that houses now need to have a certain number of square footage, 10,000 square feet per lot. Why is Victorville moving in that direction? What's their reasoning behind it? To reduce the actual growth. Why? So it's the opposite of what Mike is saying. Why is Victorville wanting to reduce growth?
So maybe jobs can catch up?
What's that? Truthfully, what they're worried about is slow down the growth and manage the growth in a smarter manner. Too much growth and then it strains resources. But we're not talking about just water, and we're not talking about just energy. What are we also talking about? Schools, what else are we talking about?
Public infrastructure.
Police, right? Fire, right? Hospitals. They have to manage the growth. Who has come out in opposition to this?
Builders.
Yes, the Building Industry Association. the Realty Association. Why are they opposed to it?
That's what we do.
Because if you go from about 4,000 square foot lot to a 10,000 square foot lot, you build less homes. Yeah, so it's going to cut into their ability to produce profits off of developable land. Developable, yeah, something like that. Land. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. All right. Now, if you look here, this is a planning area map. This is actually how they split it up. Northern expansion area. They got an SCLA area. They actually have all parts of Victorville sort of zoned out to how they want to see it planned. Notice here, northern expansion area is still kind of conducive with open space. Do you guys see this? So they're planning these different areas in Victorville. This is really important. This is what cities do. Cities decide how they're going to want to plan. Cities that don't do this struggle mightily. Adelanto's kind of the example of this. Adelanto has never had proper land use planning, and they've struggled. Apple Valley has phenomenal land use planning, which is why they don't struggle. Apple Valley is, and anybody's ever tried to build in Apple Valley, or anybody's tried to do anything in Apple Valley, they're pretty tough, aren't they? Yeah, they're very difficult to deal with. There's a reason why. You know, what you notice is cities that tend to be wealthier, cities that tend to have more income, the people who live there tend to be much stricter about what you can and cannot build. So if you complain, you say, well, government won't let me do this, government won't let me do that, you need to actually kind of blame the citizens. Because the citizens are only doing what the politicians are telling them. So for example, what's a classic ordinance they have in Apple Valley? That every home has to be what?
Half acre.
Half acre. Has that reduced development in Apple Valley?
Absolutely.
You better believe it has. Why do you think Apple Valley has instituted a half acre rule for their lots?
They want to keep it rural.
They want to keep it rural, and they want to keep out the density, and density can lead to more crime, density can lead to more services, density in general can lead to an increase in wealth, because you bring in more wealthy people, or it can lead to an increase in poverty, right? So they're managing this. It's a social policy more than anything else. They're managing what they want to see in their city. So when Adelanto says we don't have much of a policy, then builders do what they want. And what do you see out in Adelanto? Just
a lot of poverty.
Growth, you know what I mean? And what happens if you grow too fast as a city? Yeah, what happens? Older sections become...
There's no organization at all.
That's right. So local land use planning is of the utmost importance for local governments. That's pretty much what they're designed to do. And that's their entire raison d'etre, and for the whole reason for living, is to have appropriate land use ordinances so the city can grow in the direction that the people feel best. Now, if you look here, the city of if you look here, there's phenomenal growth. Victorville, from 2000 to 2008, saw almost 100% increase in its population. Hesperia, 40%. Adelanto, 55%. Check out Apple Valley. It grew, but not at the rates that these places do. Not places, these cities. So do you think land use affects growth in cities?
Sure.
No doubt about it. If you just do it at a bar graph, what do you see here? Victorville doubled in population in 10 years. Can you feel the difference? For those of you that have been up here for more than 10 years?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yes, you can, can't you? Well, that's because it's true. You can feel the difference because it doubled in population. Okay, so just to kind of give you guys an idea of why the importance of it, and you can see it here in our own backyard, the importance of it. Now, here's another way of land use ordinance. This is the flood hazard maps. This is conducted by a regional organization, and it shows where are the potential flood zones. I have a home in Hesperia on the flood zone. I pay $1,500 a year in flood insurance. The probability of a flood happening is less than 1%. But because I live in a flood hazard zone, my FEMA insurance that I'm required to own, right, is $1,500 a month, or $1,500 a year. Did I say a month?
Yes.
My apologies. $1,500 a year. $1,500
By
a
the
month.
Mesa?
Yeah, I'm at the Gulch, the bottom of the Gulch.
Yep.
You know where Adobe Street is?
Yep.
That's why. I actually have to get a LOMA. I actually have to get something that shows that my house isn't going to flood, because my house actually sits, it's an older home built in 64, actually sits in a foundation high enough where it won't flood. And I need to prove that to FEMA so I can get out of the insurance thing. So, but this, why do they require me to buy insurance, you think?
Because there is a chance.
They're protecting themselves.
Are they just protecting themselves?
What
I want you to think about this. Are they just protecting themselves? They're protecting the community. How?
Because they don't want everybody to leave after such a disaster.
You got it. What happens if it floods the entire gulch right there, all the homes are gone? Am I going to rebuild? Absolutely not. I will not rebuild.
It's not
Not going to happen. You know what I mean? I can guarantee you that. So what will happen if I have flood insurance now?
Yeah, you will.
Possibility of rebuilding.
There is no possibility. They'll pay to rebuild.
Yeah.
It's a FEMA insurance, which means it's backed by the federal government, which means it will rebuild. Is that good for the community?
Yeah.
Do you want me to rebuild my home there?
No, wait.
Yeah. No, you don't want me to? Move it?
That's just like, wait a minute, wait a minute. It's just like we went on the
Case you
shore
don't.
trip, and there's homes in the middle of the lake. Really? It's a lake. Why are you building a home and
The
having
house
houses
that I
on
own
a lake?
will not flood. My house sits on a foundation high enough where it's not going to flood. No way for it to flood. It'd have to be a
No.
catastrophic 500-year flood. And at that point, you know, it's like the big one, the earthquake hitting. At that point, what? Let it go, right? Let it go. Right.
So if it did flood, just say it did happen, and you got that insurance money, do you have to build right where your house got flooded out, or can you rebuild somewhere else?
Generally, what they do with insurance, and I'm not an insurance expert, but how things usually work with federal, with how it worked in Katrina, like in New Orleans, was that you had to rebuild back to what it was. And that was actually a point of controversy because a lot of folks said, well, why don't we build it better? But the way the law worked was that you can't build better, you have to build to what it was. So there's a lot of controversy about that because a lot of folks, and I have a lot of pictures from doing tours and research in Katrina about these folks, and they chose not to rebuild because they said if I just build it back to what it was, it's going to flood again. So they said, why can't we put a foundation? And the government, FEMA, said, well, that's going to have to come out of your pocket. We will build it to what it was before. Point of contention, right? Obviously, right? Big, huge point of contention. I can understand why those folks felt very angry. I would feel angry too if that happened to me. Sure.
I was gonna ask, is the insurance paid to FEMA? Is it a government body that's being paid to, or is it a private insurance company?
It's a government body. Flood insurance used to be private and it went bankrupt. So now it was taken over by the federal government. The federal government took it over because only the federal government is wealthy enough to back such type of insurances.
And that counts for any natural disaster?
Nope.
No?
No, it does not, because earthquake insurance is not federally backed.
And fires.
No, that's right. Fire is not either. Flood insurance is because of politics. Politics is what's driving it. People feel very strongly that because of a hurricane, right, that they shouldn't be. That's mostly because of hurricanes. It's not really to do with homes flooding here in the high desert. You see what I'm saying? It has more to do with hurricanes where flooding happens more frequently, as often what you see. Yeah, we could tell people don't build there again, but you know, I mean, it's 130 more million people are going to be in the United States in the next 50 years. Where are you going to put those 130 million people?
Not in my backyard.
Flood zone.
Where are you going to put those 130 million people? That's a great question, right? I'm just being honest with you. You want our economy to grow? Best way for you to have our economy to grow, for you to have a job, is for more people to be here. More people come with a cost, though, don't they? Sure they do.
Sure, you happy with stabilization, though.
Huh?
I'd be happier with stabilization, you know.
Well, we'll talk about this because there's different types of planning, and we'll talk about what to do with this growth, right? So a scholar by the name of Guy Ben Veniste identified 4 basic types of planning: trivial, utopian, imperative, and intentional. The trivial plan is a little more than a statement of what will take place. Projects the future, but actually makes no attempt to influence the future. Adelanto, you could argue, had somewhat of a trivial plan, really saying, oh, this is what it's going to be, but they didn't really say how they wanted to see it. A utopian plan is pretty much what it means. It's similar to a trivial plan in that it will have no impact on the status quo, but for a different reason. The utopian plan describes a future no one will really expect to occur, therefore the plan's not taken seriously. As if these are utopian plans that say, oh, we're never going to run out of water, right?
Yeah.
Or the housing market will never stop, it'll never crash. Kind of utopian plans, right? So some cities, Palmdale, Lancaster, they were built on the idea that the housing market will continue, their values will continue, therefore let's have land use planning like that. That's a utopian dream, right? Of course it's going to crash. If it's growing at phenomenal rates, it's going to crash at phenomenal rates. That's classic economics, right? So keep this in mind. Imperative planning is the ideal type of planning. Imperative planning is what most people think of when they think of land use planning. Under imperative types of land use planning, development plans are mandatory, must be made well in advance and enforced. Ideally, the plan is a guide, implemented by the law and applied to specific situations by rational people operating in a non-political manner. The ideal type of imperative planning conforms with reality only occasionally, because local land use decisions, guys, are both intense and political in nature. So even though imperative planning is the best, we have these laws. Apple Valley says this is how we're going to follow it. We don't want this growth. Then what happens is the political pressure comes in to build a Walmart. And you get a bunch of people signing the petition saying we don't want a Walmart, but there's the pressure there. You see what I'm saying? So local land use planning is both intense and political in nature. So that's why imperative planning is the best, but it doesn't always conform with what's on the ground. The last type of planning is called intentional planning. This is when the means of implementation for the plan are unavailable or insufficient. Therefore, what happens is the realization of the plan is dependent on the agreements of private parties or individual action. In other words, what happens is government is absent. Government doesn't really have a plan, but they don't have a plan because they don't know what to do. The plan is to let the market decide what to do best with this. So a good example of this may be some of the developments that have occurred on the SCLA. So SCLA was a government effort to try and recruit industries there. But which industries ended up coming in were best decided by the market. You guys see this? So Boeing came up and they repaint like 95% of their planes there, if I'm not mistaken, or the airlines do. That was mainly by the market, and the other things that are done there. You see what I'm saying? So yes, government effort, local land use planning to bring industry there. What industries went in there though? Best decided by the market. All right? Cost-benefit analysis is key for any of this. You guys remember that? Right, cost-benefit analysis. Although ideally land use planning should be a non-political process, guys, it's inherently political. You know, the politics of zoning is best demonstrated again with the issuance of what's called a variance. A variance or a request for land use that's inconsistent with the overall plan. So Apple Valley might say that our density is X amount of people per acre, but then they'll issue a variance to Walmart. Or they'll issue a variance to Jess Ranch. And Jess Ranch will build a senior center, which obviously the density is far more, right, than one home per acre. Far more. Why give a variance to Jess Ranch to build their senior centers?
They're not big troublemakers.
Because the Apple Valley has decided to go against its own local land use because they think it's in the best interest of the city.
Well, there's a lot of retirement money. They're not using up jobs.
That's right. That's their argument. Yeah. Do you see what I'm saying? So how about putting a convenience store in a residential neighborhood? Or subdivision on previously designated agricultural lands. A lot of these require variance permits that involve a special process. So that's what a variance is. And again, in any land use planning, cost-benefit analysis is key. Cities and municipalities have to make trade-offs when developing a long-term plan for land use. Urban planning is a type of land use planning that deals mainly with development in metropolitan areas. Urban planning is carried out with 4 major types of urban designations: residential, commercial, industrial, and special use areas. Within these 4 categories are a number of subcategories. For example, within the residential category, there's subcategories that include single-family homes, multiple family dwellings, and a combination of both. Some communities prefer mixed zoning. For example, being able to walk to the store or bike to work, which is only possible when land is zoned in a way that allows residential and commercial developments close together. So for example, you may have businesses on the bottom, residents on top. You see what I'm saying? So this type of mixed zoning is very popular that you're seeing in cities. Urban zoning laws have also been very successful in limiting urban sprawl and urban decay. For example, both the states of Oregon and Washington have very, very strong laws limiting sprawl and the decay of urban centers. For example, anybody visited Portland, Oregon? Yeah. Did you notice that Portland, Oregon, it's real hard to find urban decay? You don't find the super impoverished areas, do you? In Portland.
I wasn't looking. We're on it now.
You know, in most cities, you don't have to look. You what?
Yeah, oh, sure.
Yeah, you notice.
It finds you.
Yeah. Portland has kept a tight lid. And you notice what happens right outside the Portland city limits? How green is it?
Oh, right up to the pavement. I mean, they have to fight the forest back. It's amazing.
They have passed laws not allowing for development past the city limits. Are so strict on the type of development that can happen within the county and within the state. That's because they want to keep that green. How easy would it be for them to tear it all down and build up?
Easy. And
Easy, they choose not
buy
to.
building material.
What are the costs? Property in Portland is what? Really expensive. How expensive is it to live in Portland? Really expensive. Yeah, those are the costs. Does that make sense? What happens if you're a family of 5? You're not living in Portland, I'll tell you that much. That's too expensive. Yeah, you see what I'm saying? But that's because Seattle's very similar. Seattle's very similar in the way that they're trying to manage their growth, limit urban sprawl. That's what they do. Specific zoning decisions are made by planning commissions or zoning boards, that are elected or appointed. They usually have a lot of these people who are on these boards have no formal training in planning or government whatsoever. They're usually there because for political reasons, to be honest with you. Ordinarily, the planning commission or the zoning board is the same body that governs a city or a county. In some cases, if it's not, then they have to report to the county, and then their decisions can be subject to the approval of, let's say, a city or a county governmental body. Part of land use is also the concept of eminent domain. Eminent domain is defined as the power of state or local government to take or expropriate private property for public use without owner's consent. Expropriate is simply a fancy word for saying dispossess. Take the land away from you. This is constitutionally legal. It is written into the Constitution that they can take land away from you for the public good. The Fifth Amendment reads in part, quote, "Nor may private property be taken for public use without just compensation." What is it saying there?
They have to pay you for your land.
That if they take your land, they have to what?
Pay you a fair market.
Which means ultimately then government has the right to do what?
Take your land.
Take your land. Do you notice that? Did you read
That's
this?
what they do freeways, right?
What's that?
That's what they do when they do freeways?
That's how they built the 105 freeway through Norwalk and Compton, yeah.
But what happens to values
They
when
took
this
your
is
in-laws'
part of the
land.
tentative plan?
What's that?
What happens to property values when this is part of the tentative plan and
It goes through a
Look what's
formal,
coming.
you go through due process. Goes through a formal process, and independent assessors come in, they assess the land. Why do you think a lot of cities were giddy when property values fell? Some of them some of them bemoaned the loss of taxes, right? Some of them were like, now's the time to what? Go buy properties and build stuff. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, some of the church land that they bought over there by Nisqually, right, that bridge, you notice that church that's right there? The church actually struggled because they were in a lawsuit with the city, if I'm not mistaken. Neville, remember this, for eminent domain. They're trying to eminent domain some of that land to build that bridge, La Mesa and Nisqually, and the church was asking X amount of dollars. And then when property values fell, the judge said, hey, this is how much it's worth, therefore this is what the city is legally obligated to give you.
Is that the same problem they had when they were extending the 210
Hmm?
from Foothill all the way down?
yes.
Yeah, yes. Anytime they're trying to take land from private property for public use, you have to be compensated. And again, just compensation is a limitation of the government's implied right to take private property, but they can. Does that make sense? They can take private property. Now, in this Supreme Court case in Kelo versus the City of New London, the Supreme Court actually provided a new meaning to the Fifth Amendment. In addition to just compensation, the court said that the Fifth Amendment prevents the government from taking private property except for public use, which the court said that local governments then could force owners to sell their property not just for building freeways, not just for building a park or building a bridge, but also for private economic development, if local officials believe that it would benefit the public. This was a switch, and a lot of people weren't very happy about this. So what they said is that the city of Victorville can take property away from private owners if they believe it's in the best interest of the city to develop this privately. So knocking down slum apartments and putting in something new. So for example, in Riverside, they got rid of mobile homes, and the idea was by getting rid of mobile homes, they can then build up senior living apartments. So you're trading one private piece of land for another private piece. Yeah, that's actually very controversial because people are like, okay, I understand you want to take my home away for a freeway, right? You want to take my home away for a bridge. But now you're taking my home away so you can build something different.
Or you can serve this special purpose.
Or you can serve the business community. Or you can serve this community. You see what I'm saying? So very controversial Kilo versus the city of New London. The ruling provided the affirmation that state and local governments have sought their use for eminent domain for urban revitalization. The term public use is problematically vague. Many urban planners, municipal government officials, and real estate developers contend that eminent domain is simply a matter of just gathering land. Others argue no. Public use clause, they argued, wasn't meant to be taken as far. So it's still very much in contention. What does it mean? Some states passed laws limiting public or eminent domain. Some states said, no, we don't allow for eminent domain to be taking place for private economic reasons. Do you understand what I'm saying? You take a mobile home, knock it down, mobile home park, knock it down, put up a shopping center because the officials have said it what? Benefits the city, yeah. That's what they're saying here. All right.
Where's the city of New London at?
Huh?
Where was that? New London, what state?
I want to say Connecticut.
Connecticut, that's what I'd say.
Yeah, I think it's Connecticut. Here's examples of eminent domain. Here's an Iowa Avenue grade separation in Riverside, California that's complete now. What they had to do was actually buy land around here so they could build a bridge over the railroad tracks. You guys see what I'm saying? I don't know if you guys know where Iowa Avenue is in Riverside.
Yeah.
And then notice California High-Speed Rail, they have to buy a lot of land in order to actually have the land available so they could build not only the rail but the stations as well. When you get into the more populated areas, it's going to be more expensive. That's why they're starting here, which I think is really odd that they're starting in the middle, right? But it seems to be the cheapest and fastest way to start building the high-speed rail program. Just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. All right, smart growth. There's problems with urban sprawl because sprawling patterns of development will continue to be a major issue in the 21st century. In the first half of this century, by 2050, the American population is expected to increase by 50%. That's an additional 130 million people that would need places to live, work, and play. California alone, from 2000 to 2010, grew by 9.7%. We are growing as a country. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Places like Japan, they're decreasing in population, which makes it more difficult because younger people have to support more older people, and it's becoming difficult. Japan, one of the reasons why we're growing is A, we still have more babies than people in other countries, and B, we have immigration. Between those two things, we still have more kids than people in Europe. Our teen pregnancy rates and young people pregnancy rates are higher than they are in other countries. Sometimes we say that's bad, right? Because it tends to impoverish people, but it's a population growth. I mean, these are all potential customers. They're all potential people that are going to buy in the future. You see what I'm saying? Europeans and Japanese people aren't having kids. It's a big problem. They are not having kids.
Where are all the jobs for all these?
Well, that's the good thing, is the jobs are there in the U.S. better than they are in other countries. I'll tell you that much. The economy here is much more dynamic than you see in other countries.
Why people are coming here.
Yeah, that's why people are still coming here. You know when things are bad? When Mexican immigration was 0 from 2010, 11, and 12. That net immigration, according to the Department of Homeland Security for Mexico, was 0. That means as many Mexican immigrants came in as many Mexican immigrants left. What does that tell you?
Other than we're, well,
No, it's
So
true.
It wasn't the place to be
It wasn't the place to be. Why?
because things were not good here.
You want your
It
economy
wasn't
to grow?
Any better here than it was for them.
Yeah,
there.
just to show you, how much do you think a bathroom remodel should cost? Let's put these in perspective, because this is what immigration does, and I'm getting way off topic here. But just so you understand what immigration does, it provides inexpensive labor. How much do you think a bathroom remodel should cost here? $3,000? $4,000? What do you guys think? My buddy in Australia, guess what his bathroom remodel cost in Sydney? $21,000.
Oh my God.
$21,000.
nice bathroom.
Why?
You know, because labor is super expensive there. His brother is a painter. He makes about $150,000 a year as a painter because he demands it and he gets it. Here we have so much immigration and so much inexpensive labor. You want somebody to paint your house, what do you do? Hola, señor. ¿Puedes pintar mi casa? $10 en hora. Está bien.
Not
Vamos.
only that, but like a lot of companies.
I'm very serious about this.
don't-
Australia limits immigration, so what happens then? Cost of labor goes up. End of story. You don't like this? You want to grow
Well, they're
your
all
economy and not pay exorbitant prices? Then you have to have immigration. Or have more kids.
But
There's
that's
no
not
real way about it.
sustainable.
What's that?
That's not sustainable. It has to end. It has to end somewhere, unfortunately, or everybody's getting wet.
No, that's reality, because if we don't,
It
if they
is
don't
reality, but is it?
if they don't come from Mexico, they'll come from China
Well, sure.
or from India.
Are those damn Canadians?
come
Actually,
from
Canadians
everywhere.
don't.
I lived on the border.
Yeah, they come from everywhere. I
They
mean,
come from Belgium.
you know that Mexicali has a huge Chinese population, right?
Yeah.
It's because they couldn't cross the border because we were like, hey, wait a minute.
Hey.
Wait, you don't look right, you know? So they
Make some
stayed in
fun,
Mexicali. That's what we would, Border Patrol's like, what are you doing? Whoa, you know, stay there. You know, I'm dead serious about this. You ask these Mexicans of Chinese descent in Mexicali, and they're like, why are you here? Well, my parents tried to cross the border and they couldn't, so we got stuck here. That's what
They
they
don't
say.
tell you in English, they tell you in Spanish.
They tell you in Spanish. I think they speak great Spanish.
Prime example, my son's father is Mexican and Chinese. How did that happen? Because his parents are from Mexico.
Yeah, that happens quite a
Right.
bit actually. You'd be surprised. Anyways, I'm
Yeah.
off topic. I'm way off topic. Here's the thing: is we must ask ourselves, guys, where are we going to build the new homes, offices, and shops to accommodate these people? Demography is not destiny. We cannot guarantee. I'm not gonna guarantee you that we're gonna have 130 more million people. But I look at trends. Does that make sense? And the trends say we're moving in this direction. Now, urban sprawl has created a number of problems, including but not limited to a declining tax base, automobile dependency, pollution, a loss of social capital, which I won't get into because we're running out of time. As people leave the city for more spacious living quarters, city property values decline, tax rates rise, social problems and crime tend to increase. A study conducted in 2000, when using the 2000 census data, showed that the 4 most sprawling cities in the United States, number 1 was Riverside. Number 2 and 3 were Greensboro and Raleigh, North Carolina. Number 4 was Atlanta, Georgia. In fact, Riverside was singled out because over 66% of the population lives 10 miles or more from a central business district. And residential density is so low that only 1% of the population is effectively served by mass transit. I grew up in Riverside. I can tell you this for a fact, that Riverside is probably one of the most sprawling areas in the United States if you can find it. It's an example of urban sprawl, of what we're talking. It's 60 miles outside of LA. People move there because it's cheaper and they commute in, right?
Bless you.
Since smart growth, let's see here. Smart growth then is a term used to describe a set of planning guidelines that become popular with urban reformers as a means of preventing urban sprawl. Developers mix land use and design on properties and design transportation systems to enhance community transit, walking, and biking. Supporters assert that smart growth decreases air quality problems in urban centers and makes more efficient use of available land. And land use planning in smart growth areas emphasize community by creating more public spaces. Now, smart growth wants to do is try to have a connection between development and quality of life. In other words, you can develop, we can grow, but let's do it in a smart way that doesn't affect our quality of life. That's the argument. So growth is not discouraged. Instead, it aims for responsible development that concentrates on community quality of life, design, economics, environment, health, housing, and transportation. Core principles include mixed land use, compact building design, walkable communities, preservation of open space, numerous transportation choices, and community and stakeholder collaboration and development decisions. This is a picture of San Elijo. No, you know what I'm talking about, San Elijo right there, on the other side of the mountains where I live in San Marcos. And what they've done here is business.
Where your rich neighbors live.
Well, that's right, you know, the wealthy.
Snooty labor.
The snooty live, right? If you look here, there's businesses on the bottom, residences on top. Right on the other side of the street is a huge open field, huge open park. So the idea is compact living, right? Walk to your yoga place, walk to your supermarket, which is right down here, walk to the bar, right? The idea is you park your car after you get home from work and walk everywhere. And actually, they do. It's pretty darn nice, I'm not going to lie to you. You know, you come over here and you just park your car and you walk everywhere. That's the idea of smart growth. You guys have seen this now. It's starting to become more popular in suburban areas where they go up rather than out.
And keeps money local.
Yeah, and it does. Yeah, you're not traveling to go eat. You just walk to go eat. That's right. Absolutely. That's the idea of a walkable community. It's not ideal. I mean, how many people are that living up there still have to travel to work? Most do. Does that make sense? But what would happen here in the desert is if I'm up here in Victorville and I want to go get something to eat, I got to get in my car and do what? If I want to go get a beer, what do I got to do? If I got to go to the pharmacy, what do I got to do? So at least what are they trying to do here?
Reduce carbon footprint.
Reduce your carbon footprint, and also you get out, and what happens when you get out and you're walking in the community? You meet other people. You create social capital. You get to know the people around you. It does make for a better community. How many of you feel in Victorville like you, or Hesperia, you don't actually know your neighbors?
Yeah.
Because you never see them. Why would you?
You don't.
What's that?
Well, a lot of people don't.
Or they're locked up?
They duck.
Or they duck.
I pass people. I live on a dirt road out in very
Yeah.
rural. You wave to people and they've got something better to do down here. So it's really strange.
Yeah.
I think they'd be more.
This goes back to what they were talking about before. Although less visible than construction of a new shopping center, soil erosion and the loss of agricultural productivity is no less a threat to communities and urban sprawl. It lacks what I mentioned earlier, that kind of crisis quality that's sometimes necessary to motivate policymakers to act. Every year the U.S. loses potential future agricultural productivity. Agricultural productivity is dependent on the quality and quantity of soil and the availability of water. Now, to put things in perspective, approximately 6 pounds of soil are lost in the U.S. for every pound of food that is eaten. Wow. The average person eats about 2,000 pounds of food per year, which means approximately 1.68 billion pounds of topsoil annually are lost just through typical eating habits. In total, they estimate in the U.S. about 3 billion tons of topsoil are lost each year. Okay? Now in the U.S., the friend Marion, was that her name? Marion?
Marion, yeah.
Marion, for the Natural Resource Conservation Service, within the Department of Agriculture, is the primary authority for soil erosion. That's actually how they started with the Dust Bowl, as she mentioned. They provide technical assistance, useful data, but as she mentioned, they have no authority to regulate agricultural practices that prevent erosion. So in 1986, what she didn't mention was that lawmakers took a major step forward to preventing erosion on previously undeveloped farmland. They had in what's called the sod buster provision that denied federal farm benefits for crops grown on newly plowed grasslands that were vulnerable to erosion. So in other words, you plow new grasslands, you put crops on there. A lot of these crops are subsidized by U.S. government subsidy, they're by U.S. government money. So what they said is, if you're going to plow new grassland, we're not going to give you money to do that. You're going to do it on your own. That really curtailed it. Do you see what I'm saying? Kept farmers from expanding into virgin grassland. In 2006, the USDA created the Grassland Reserve Program to assist landowners in restoring and conserving grassland. Now, historically, grassland and scrubland covered 1 billion acres, or exactly half of the landmass of the lower 48 states. Between 1982 and 2002 alone, about 24 million acres of grassland and scrubland were converted for agriculture and other uses. So you see that we have a real struggle trying to keep our grassland and our scrubland intact. Why don't you want to plow your grassland? Why do you want to keep it intact? Is it just for
erosion and
For dust control or topsoil?
water retention?
water retention.
Most people tend to forget, how is the water percolated back into the aquifers?
There's a cob and sink.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's important for us to have these lands. If you don't even care about the climate change, throw all that aside. Simple water percolation, right? Bringing it back in. How is the water captured and not run off? Yeah, this is a main part of it. Farmland conversion is a worldwide problem. Oftentimes, the best farmland is adjacent to metropolitan areas. As these areas grow, the land becomes more inundated with homes, roads, and other improvements that remove it from agricultural production. Between 1982 and 2002, 13 million acres of agricultural land was converted to non-agricultural uses in the U.S. Now, who decides when something becomes farmland and becomes suburban home? The market does. The market decides when this conversion takes place, private entities. And when the land becomes valuable enough, some people argue, then it is sold to developers. And that's what happens. Agricultural land, they argue, is not as valuable as land that could be developed for homes when cities sprawl. So they convert, that's what I think that gentleman said he had a farm in Chino. Wow, I'm impressed. They still have farms in Chino?
A few.
Yeah, most of the farms in Chino and Eastville were sold off to become homes because the land is more valuable. Now, there's some economists out there who argue that when the value of agricultural land is high enough, building and pavement will be moved and the land will be put back into agricultural production. I don't buy that for a second. Anybody who tells you that doesn't know what they're talking about. It's highly unlikely from a practical standpoint, and perhaps impossible from an ecological standpoint for this to occur. Farmland conversion is phenomenally rare if ever happens. You just don't see it happening. Honestly, what you may be seeing is urban gardens, right, where they have a reclaimed piece of land in Detroit, but you got to put in fertilizer. You got to get that land ready. It's not going to be ready overnight. It's going to take a long time. All right. Desertification is a process of turning productive land into wasteland. In semi-arid areas, such as where we live in the American Southwest, grasses and other vegetation secure the soil and retain moisture. If the plants die through overgrazing, trampling, or harvesting for fuel, the moisture retention capacity of the ground is lost, and the land slowly is converted to full desert, fully arid desert. In the U.S., desertification is impacting an estimated 225 million acres, primarily in the Southwest. So the desertification process is primarily happening here. Literally, we are ground zero for it here in the desert. Well, I was also talking about the Sahel, right? This is the Sahel. Here is the grasslands that abut the Sahara. The Sahara is moving how fast, Neville? A year? A mile a year or something like that?
Couple miles a year.
Couple miles a year, because farmers here are overgrazing the Sahel, the grasslands, and the desert is taking over. Okay? You also see other players, right, in South Africa where Nev's from, overgrazing in parts of in Australia, and poor land use management. It's not just the farmer's fault. It could be how they're developing or doing what they're doing with the land. Why do you think Neville's screaming about building these windmills, right, or these solar plants? And what happens when you scrape off all the land? What do you think you're doing? Right? Yeah, you're causing damage. You're causing a process of desertification to quicken up here.
Right. The point that kind of got gone over quickly today with this whole conversation we had about desertification and soils and all that is the main thing you guys need to remember is the soil is a living thing. In the grasslands and the prairies, a millimeter, couple millimeters, about the size of a old sugar cube, can have 10,000 microorganisms in it. It's a living ecosystem. And the moment you scrape it, with nothing growing there, no fungus and mycorrhiza and all this stuff, it dies.
Yep.
So once it's dead, it's desert, and it's extremely hard to bring it back. You have to put a lot of water, a lot of organic matter, and in most cases, all the good stuff, the good substrate, just becomes a bunch of little sand particles. It blows away. So it's desert. It's not coming back.
It's not coming back. The process
In a
of
dry
desert,
climate, it's not coming
yeah,
back.
the process of desertification is almost irreversible.
Yeah.
Almost. I only say almost because technology might do something different in the future.
The soil, but the concept people have to realize, soil dies is what happens.
Yeah, literally, yeah, it dies, and so you need the living soil for farmers to be able to produce. And when you don't take care of the soil, this is why the Dust Bowl happened. This is why people, thousands of people left to come over here to California for that primary reason. All right, I'm moving fast. Sorry, I'm moving fast in this. I want to get through this. Federal land management. The management of federal land holdings in the U.S. is of major importance to the economies of the western states. Federal lands make up approximately 1/3 of the continental United States, some 726 million acres, and contain roughly 1/4 of the nation's coal, 4/5 of our shale oil deposits, and half of U.S. uranium, oil, and gas deposits. 70% of western public lands are permitted to ranchers at relatively low rates for grazing, and about 5% of sheep and 3% of cattle produced in the U.S. are fed this way. Now, land management involves the concept of multiple use. Multiple use means that various activities can be carried out simultaneously on federal lands. It has been a policy of some federal land management since the turn of the century. Now, multiple use means what? Logging, mining, grazing, recreation, and wilderness protection. The difficulties in reconciling these competing uses have led some to question whether multiple use management is possible, and others to say whether or not it's even desirable. The idea is, can we really balance these interests? And the Bureau of Land Management and other agencies, they struggle, but they try to balance these interests as much as they can, and it's not easy to do so. Now, recreation of many different federal lands has increased significantly, guys, over the past 20 years. For example, the Colorado Plateau, which includes Zion, Grand Canyon, Bryce Canyon, Lake Powell, increased a 49% visitation rate from 2008 to 2009. 48%. It seems that people couldn't travel because of the recession far away, so what did they do? Got in their car and drove somewhere. Do you see that? Because it was cheaper to do so. So, when you see these number of visitations, it does have an impact. And how do you manage all these people trying to visit the parks? How do you manage all these people trying to visit these lands? The number of visitations has shown increases at all national parks in recent years. In 2009, the National Park Service registered 10 million more visitors than national parks the previous year. So we're seeing an increase, right, in people visiting. In 1996, Congress created the Fee Demonstration Project. It allows for federal land management agencies to collect recreation fees to cover some of the costs of managing recreation. It also serves to regulate the use and overuse of some popular federal recreation areas. The fees are intended for maintenance projects and for public service enhancements at project sites. In other words, what's the best way to kind of limit access to the common resource? What's that? You charge. You privatize it, right? You no longer allow it to be a public common. You limit access to it to preserve it. You guys remember this? This is what you're seeing with the forest. Another management tool and source of revenue on federal lands is the issuing of recreation permits for commercial use and the licensing of concessions. Permits are issued to private companies to operate on public lands to produce a profit, such as lodging and food services. You guys are all familiar. What's that right there?
Adventure pass.
Yeah, why do you now have to buy an adventure pass?
Go there.
Otherwise, what will happen if you don't have an adventure pass?
You get a ticket.
What's that?
And what if you don't pay that ticket? Nothing. That's what I found.
I'm not sure.
Really?
I stopped getting them like 5 years ago. I was the only one. It seemed.
I don't know.
You know?
I'm not the one to risk that. I think they tie it to your DMV, don't they? I don't know.
Well,
I'll give it a
Yeah.
try.
not
now
so
that I know.
far. And in fact, I think it was those two, one of those ranger gals that was telling me this. She says they don't enforce it. They'll hand out tickets, but nobody's doing anything.
Not yet.
You know, and I'm paying $35 a year, and forget it.
Now, why do they want to have these fees? What's the idea?
Well, to limit use and
Yeah.
manage and maintain.
Yeah, manage and maintain. That's right. Keep in mind that for many land management agencies, these fees fall far short of the costs. They don't cover all the costs, not even close, right?
What is a ticket? 35?
You know,
The annual is like
haven't
35,
bought
and
one
the
in
daily
4
is like
years.
7.
how much is it?
The annual is 35, and the daily is like 7. And
7. I haven't bought one in 4 years. I haven't needed one since I moved to San Marcos. I don't go out to I hike. I just park and hike now. When you park down there, most of them are state lands, not federal lands, so it's a little bit different. Commercial recreation involves what? Hunting, hiking, mountain biking, river running, and backpacking activities. All the stuff this son John likes to do. You know, fire management is another type of federal land management practice. There are 2 fire management practices that have caused a lot of controversy. Double mentioned these kind of last week, I think. Prescribed burns are human-ignited fires used for management purposes, and prescribed natural fires, or what we call let it burn practices. The let it burn policy proved quite controversial in the summer of 1988 when a series of lightning storms caused fires that led to extensive destruction that burned close to 1/2 of Yellowstone National Park's 2.2 million acres. The National Park Service policy to let it burn led to irreparable harm as 100 years of fire suppression had created in Yellowstone an unnatural and hazardous depth of forest fuel. So, in response to stuff like this, in 2000, a national fire plan was enacted to reduce the risk of forest fires on federal lands. One of the main objectives of the plan is the reduction of hazardous fuels within national forests. 5 keys for this plan are firefighting, rehabilitation and restoration, hazardous fuel reduction, community assistance, and accountability. The Healthy Forest Restoration Act of 2003 focuses on hazardous fuel reduction on federal lands using prescribed fires, wildland fires, crushing, tractor and hand piling, thinning, and pruning. Now, critics have argued that the methods of thinning the forest to prevent catastrophic fires is not the solution, but that the Forest Service should be focusing more on its efforts on removing brush, they argue, which actually creates, they argue, more fuel for these fires. So a bit of debate among the folks, right, on how to best manage fires, right? What's the best approach for this? Now, moving on to roadless areas, millions of acres of national forest land that remain unhindered by roads. In January 2001, the Forest Service enacted what's known as the Roadless Conservation Rule to protect this land. Under the rule, 1/3 of the National Forest System total acreage, about 58 million acres of national forest land in 39 states, is off limits to road building and logging. At the same time, these lands are still open to public access and recreation. These activities include hiking, fishing, hunting, camping, mountain biking, and recreational jobs generating revenue in local areas that are all endorsed and encouraged. The roadless rule, though, was created under the premise that roadless areas are important, not only as habitat, but also as buffer zones. Roadless areas, they argue, protect many species of fish and wildlife. And over 1,600 threatened, endangered, or sensitive plant animal species live within these roadless areas. Also, they argue that many of these roadless areas are the watersheds that supply clean drinking water to many communities. So you can see this up from where Riverside gets its water from. It's the Santa Ana River. The watershed is up at the top of the mountains. The idea is to protect this wilderness area so that way you don't threaten the watershed. This rule tends to have bipartisan support. However, it was very controversial in the mid-2000s because the Bush administration opposed it. They said, no, we don't want this rule. Part of it was they were working with the timber industry to try and revoke it. But in 2006, a federal district court reversed the Bush decision and reinstituted this Clinton-era roadless rule that ended up protecting 50 million acres of land from roads, logging, and development. So if Bush administration said, no, we do want to develop this area or have access to it, courts have stepped in and said, no, we're not going to allow it. And so you've seen some back and forth. That's what the American system is. You see a lot of back and forth. Wilderness areas. The first attempt at the preservation of federal lands came in 1872 with the creation of Yellowstone National Park. In 1964, Congress passed the Wilderness Act, which created the National Wilderness Preservation System. And since the Wilderness Act was passed, almost 106 million acres have been designated as wilderness areas. In the 1970s, the United States Forest Service adopted the position that wilderness status should only be granted to lands that they considered quote-unquote pure wilderness, defined in part as those lands that were not within the sight or sounds of roads or any other development. Furthermore, there are state and local efforts to protect wilderness, and local governments often use money to buy land to preserve it as open space for a number of different reasons. Roadless area reviews and evaluation studies are what's known as RARE, Rare 1 and Rare 2. Rare 1 recommended that the first 12 million acres should be redesignated as wilderness that they had looked at. Rare 2 recommended that Congress designate an additional 15.4 million acres immediately as wilderness and then 10.6 million acres as potential wilderness. The BLM review in 1980 determined that 150 million acres studied, only 24 million needed further consideration as wilderness study areas. I think the gentleman mentioned that earlier, right? Talking about wilderness study areas. For any wilderness areas established after January 1st, 1984, no new mineral claims are accepted. Not allowed. Existing claims for mining actually have to be validated through assessment. So they're limiting what you can and cannot mine in these wilderness areas. The Wilderness Act also allows for livestock grazing in wilderness areas, but it is subject to reasonable regulations that are deemed necessary. Now, encroachment to national park include external threats. Dam construction, sewage, chemical runoff, oil and gas mining, power plant developments, and encroachment is the major threat to our wilderness areas, and there's chronic underfunding of these agencies, which leads to the National Park Service having a difficult time going out and doing reviews. And I think they've mentioned this, right? They love having volunteers coming and do work with them because they don't have the funding to do this. All right. Endangered Species Act broadened the authority of the government to protect all threatened as well as endangered species. It authorized grant programs to assist the states and required coordination among all federal agencies. The U.S. took the lead in the protection of endangered species with the passage of this Endangered Species Act of 1973. But the act included a lot of vague words and phrases and it was open to debate. So finally, in 1978, the Supreme Court ruled that the Endangered Species Act is a comprehensive legislation for the preservation of endangered species, and it's the most comprehensive act ever enacted by a nation. And they said their quote was to halt and reverse the trend towards species extinction, whatever the cost. That's what the Supreme Court ruled. That's what endangered species means. Now, what is threatened versus endangered? For species to be considered endangered, there must be so few individuals surviving that the existence of the species is threatened. For a species to be threatened, it may still be abundant, but declining in numbers that if such existing trends continue, that they will be endangered in the future. As of 2009, more than 1,300 U.S. species of plants and animals were listed as threatened or endangered. Only 15 species have been officially declared to be recovered. You can actually click on that link there, and that link will actually take you to the list of endangered plants and animals. Now, slowly, both public and policymakers are coming to understand the larger purpose of biodiversity conservation. And the trend has been more towards conserving habitats rather than destroying them through development. Now, here's an area near where we live, up here in the desert, the Afton Canyon Natural Area, which is located 37 miles northeast of Barstow along Interstate 15, between Afton Road and Basin Road exits. According to the according to the Endangered Species Act, you can create what's known as an area of critical environmental concern. And I think there was it this week or last week?
Last week.
Last week. You guys remember they were talking about that?
Yeah.
An area of critical environmental concern. What's that?
ACEC. They probably use the acronym, yeah.
And it is, Afton Canyon is designated as an ACEC to protect plant and wildlife habitat, to preserve the scenic values of the riparian area from within the canyon. Because Afton Canyon is one of the few places where the Mojave River actually flows above ground. And so notice here, what do a lot of people like to do with this bridge over Afton Canyon?
Drive through it.
Right? Drive their what? Their Jeeps through it or their trucks through it. Why?
It's fun.
Because it's a hell of a lot of fun.
It
Right?
just happens that a historic route, the Mojave Road, goes through it. So it's a famous four-wheel drive route.
Famous four-wheel drive route. Right? So by establishing this as an area of critical environmental concern, what are they looking to regulate, you think, in the future?
That.
Exactly that. That's why I put that picture there. Because how is that going to work?
They're gonna have to make.
Are they going to fence it off? I mean, what are they going to do, right?
They're gonna have
There is a bridge. You don't have to go through
That's a
there.
railroad bridge.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
You don't have to go through there. You
Yeah,
can
you
go.
do. No, you do.
Do you?
Yeah.
That's why I went around it last time.
How did you? Helicopter?
Well, no, it wasn't a river. My buddy Barry and I went around it last time. I'll have to ask Barry, what did we do? We drove around it. Anyways,
You can go back onto the 15 to get around it.
I think that's
the
what we
40.
did. No, it wasn't the 15. Yeah, it was a 15.
Yeah, it is the 50.
Yeah, it is a 15. Yeah, so I don't know. What do you think?
They're gonna have to fence it off or something to keep people out. They're just like
Yeah.
doing the bureau
Fence.
Are they going to fence it off? But I mean,
Another road.
They could put spikes inside of there so they can go to tire.
ooh.
Oh,
That's
wow.
That's like a gorilla tactic.
Somebody just became endangered.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
And also build it, educate the public about it.
Okay.
Some trade-offs gonna have to happen.
Something's going to happen. There's going to be some kind of trade-off.
Because if you put
Definitely.
logs in there, they're just gonna try to see if they go over the
We're gonna
logs.
say thank you, yeah.
Then thank you for putting stuff in the way. All right.
Yeah, because
One of the more controversial aspects of ESA, the Endangered Species Act, is the impact the act has had on federal land use and development. The Endangered Species Act has delayed or halted the construction of a number of projects that either were using federal funding or required federal approval. It's prevented land use that could potentially harm endangered species. As is often the case, guys, with environmental policy, this is a result of complex and cumbersome procedures and decision rules. They have so many things. They've got to determine whether a given species is threatened or endangered and should be listed. Designating critical habitats, be protected. Third, enforcing regulations that govern activities directly affecting the species and their habitats. And fourth, implementing recovery plans for the species. Actions like these cannot be taken without a great deal of scientific knowledge to identify species and ecosystem functions that are at risk. Currently, the U.S. Geological Survey, more specifically the Biological Resources Division, has consolidated scientific research in an effort to inventory and monitor all plants and animal species in the nation and the hearts. Where we have our closest one, if I'm not mistaken, Neville, is that scientists are at the Box Springs Field Station near UC Riverside, and they conduct research on subjects of importance to land managers in the Mojave and western Sonoran deserts. Scientists at this field station conduct research on desert tortoise, for example, long-term population trends, causes of ill health and high mortality rates. They also look at social behavior, they look at ecology, and the factors that are affecting habitat condition. All right. And so that pretty much ends it. I hope that kind of tied in what we were talking about. That was our goal, right?
Yeah,
To
that's
kind of
awesome.
give you guys a little bit more book knowledge.
Yes.
So what the farmers are doing and how land use, how land is used. All right.
Both they put this on
All right.
YouTube, right?